"Don't eat that, sir." The words were soft, almost lost in the quiet clink of silverware in the low hum of a luxurious dining room. But they carried a strange urgency that made Daniel Hayes pause mid-bite. He looked up confused. The voice hadn't come from one of the well-trained staff who stood silently along the walls. It hadn't come from his elegant fiancée, Victoria, who sat across from him with a perfect smile and flawless posture. No, it came from somewhere lower, from the small child standing near the edge of the table. A baby girl, no older than 2, clutched tightly in the arms of a young maid. The room went still. Daniel frowned slightly, lowering his fork. "What did you say?" he asked, his tone calm but firm, the kind of voice that built billion-dollar deals and commanded entire boardrooms. The maid froze. Her face went pale, her grip tightening protectively around the child. I'm sorry, sir," she stammered. Clearly terrified she had crossed a line she couldn't come back from. She doesn't understand. She just... But the baby didn't look confused. She was staring directly at Daniel's plate. And then, with a small but determined voice, she said it again. "Don't eat." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Victoria let out a soft laugh, brushing it off. "Daniel, it's just a child. You know how they are, random, dramatic." Her tone was light, but there was something in her eyes, something sharp that flickered for just a second before disappearing. Daniel didn't laugh. He leaned back slightly, studying the scene in front of him. The maid looked nervous, almost shaken. The baby, however, didn't cry or hide. She simply watched him, as if she knew something no one else did. It didn't make sense. And yet, something about it didn't feel right. Daniel had spent his life trusting instincts over appearances. That's what made him successful. And right now, his instincts were whispering something he couldn't ignore. Slowly, he placed the fork down. The simple action changed everything. Victoria's smile tightened. "Daniel," she said gently, though there was now a subtle edge in her voice, "you're not seriously going to let a child ruin dinner, are you?" He didn't answer her. Instead, he looked at the maid again. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena, sir." "And the child?" There was a brief hesitation. "My daughter, Ava." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes drifting back to the untouched food in front of him. Everything looked perfect, smelled perfect, exactly as it should be. So, why did it suddenly feel like a mistake waiting to happen? Ava shifted in her mother's arms and reached out slightly, her tiny fingers pointing toward the plate again. Her voice was softer this time, almost a whisper. "Bad." A chill ran through Daniel. Behind him, one of the staff members shifted nervously. Across the table, Victoria's expression hardened for just a fraction of a second. So quick most people would have missed it. But Daniel didn't miss it. And in that moment, a quiet dinner turned into something far more dangerous. Because now he had a choice to make. Trust the life he had carefully built, or trust a child who had nothing to gain by lying. And as his eyes moved between the plate, the maid and the woman he was about to marry, he realized something was very, very wrong. Daniel didn't touch the plate. The silence stretched longer than it should have, thick and uncomfortable, in a room designed for luxury and control. Something invisible had slipped out of place. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady but thoughtful. "Lena," he said quietly, "how long have you been working here?" The question caught everyone off guard. Lena blinked, clearly not expecting it. "About 3 months, sir." 3 months, Daniel repeated, as if testing the weight of it. His eyes briefly moved around the dining room. The polished floors, the expensive decor, the staff who suddenly seemed unsure where to look. This house had always run perfectly. Every detail planned. Every person carefully selected, including the staff, which meant Lena wasn't here by accident. Victoria let out a small breath, forcing a smile back onto her face. "Daniel, this really isn't necessary," she said gently. "Dinner's getting cold." But Daniel didn't look at her. Instead, his attention shifted back to Ava, who was still watching with an unusual kind of focus. Not playful, not distracted, just certain. "Does she always do this?" he asked. Lena hesitated again. This time, it wasn't just fear, it was something deeper. "No, sir," she said softly. "She doesn't speak much. Only when she feels something is wrong." A faint tension moved through the room. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around her glass, though her expression stayed calm. "That's enough," she said, her tone still polite but firmer now. "She's a child, Daniel. We're reading too much into it." But Daniel had already made up his mind about one thing. He wasn't ignoring it. He reached forward slowly, not to eat, but to slide the plate slightly away from himself. It was a small movement, yet it changed the air completely. Victoria's smile faded just a little. "You're being unreasonable," she said, this time unable to fully hide the irritation in her voice. "You trust a maid's child over me?" That question hung heavily between them. Daniel finally looked at her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. This wasn't just about dinner anymore. It was about trust, about control, about something much deeper that neither of them had openly questioned until now. "I'm not accusing anyone," Daniel said calmly. "I'm just being careful." "Careful?" Victoria repeated with a short, almost disbelieving laugh. "From what?" "Your own home." That word lingered. Home. Daniel's eyes shifted again, this time more slowly, more deliberately. Something about that word didn't sit right anymore. Not tonight. Not with the way Ava kept staring at the plate. Not with the way Lena looked like she was holding back something she was too afraid to say. And not with the way Victoria was reacting. Too quick, too defensive. "Who prepared this meal?" Daniel asked suddenly. One of the senior staff stepped forward. "The kitchen team, sir. As usual." "As usual?" Daniel echoed. Everything was as usual. And yet, nothing felt normal. Ava shifted again, resting her head lightly against Lena's shoulder now, but her eyes never left Daniel. There was no fear in them, just quiet insistence, like she was waiting for him to understand something. Daniel exhaled slowly, his mind beginning to connect small, scattered pieces, things he'd ignored over the past few weeks. Subtle changes, staff rotations, decisions made without his full attention. He had trusted Victoria with many of those decisions, completely, and for the first time, that trust didn't feel solid. "Sir." Lena's voice came again, barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at her. She swallowed hard, clearly fighting her fear. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said, "but maybe it's better if you don't eat that tonight." There was again, not a demand, not an accusation, just a quiet warning. And this time, it didn't sound like it was coming from a child anymore. It sounded like someone who knew something and was risking everything just to say it. Daniel didn't respond right away. He just sat there, looking at Lena, then at Ava, and finally at the plate that now felt like the center of something far bigger than a simple dinner. The room waited for him to decide, but he wasn't ready to rush it. "Everyone can step out," he said calmly. The staff hesitated for a second, glancing at Victoria, then back at Daniel. His tone didn't change, but there was no room to argue. One by one, they quietly left the dining room until only the four of them remained. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Victoria set her glass down a little harder than necessary. "This is getting out of hand," she said. "You're dismissing your entire staff because of a child's imagination?" Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together. "I'm creating space to think," he replied. "That's all." But even he knew that wasn't the full truth. He was watching, listening, trying to catch the small details that didn't match. "Lena," he said again, softer this time, "has anything unusual happened in the house recently?" Lena's eyes flickered toward Victoria for just a second. It was quick, but it didn't go unnoticed. That tiny glance said more than words. I don't know, sir," she said carefully. "Everything seems normal." "Seems normal," Daniel repeated quietly. Ava stirred again, her small hand clutching the fabric of her mother's dress. She looked tired now, but still alert in a way that didn't fit her age. Her eyes moved slowly toward Victoria this time, and stayed there. Victoria noticed. Her expression didn't change much, but something tightened beneath the surface. "What is it with that child?" she said, her voice calm but colder now. "Why does she keep staring at me like that?" Lena immediately shifted, trying to turn Ava away, but the child resisted just enough to keep looking. Daniel caught that, and it made something inside him settle into a quiet, growing suspicion. She's just a baby, Victoria added quickly, as if correcting the moment. She doesn't understand anything. But Daniel wasn't so sure anymore. He stood up slowly, his chair making a soft sound against the polished floor. Instead of walking away, he moved toward the table and looked down at the plate again. Everything still looked untouched, perfect, exactly as it should be. Yet now, perfection itself felt like a warning. "Victoria," he said without looking at her, "when did the kitchen staff change?" There was a pause. "A few weeks ago," she answered. "I told you that. We needed better people." "Did we?" he asked. Now he turned. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, something unspoken passed between them. Not anger, not even fear, just a quiet realization that they were no longer standing on the same side of something. "You're questioning my decisions?" she asked, her voice low. "I'm reviewing them," Daniel replied. Across the room, Lena shifted her weight slightly, clearly uncomfortable being caught in the middle. She hugged Ava closer, as if preparing for something she couldn't predict. "Sir," she said again, almost unsure she should speak. Daniel looked at her. "Say it." She hesitated, then took a small breath. "There are times, late at night, when the kitchen lights are on," she said slowly, "even when no one is scheduled to be there." The room went still again. Victoria's head turned sharply. "That's ridiculous," she said. "Staff works late sometimes. That's normal." "But not like that," Lena whispered. Daniel didn't interrupt. He could see it now. The fear in her eyes wasn't just about breaking rules. It was about something she had seen or sensed and didn't fully understand herself. Ava made a soft sound, almost like a tired protest, then pointed again, this time not at the plate but slightly past it, toward the direction of the kitchen. Daniel followed her gesture slowly. His mind was racing now, but his face stayed calm. Too many things were lining up in a way he couldn't ignore anymore. Behind him, Victoria stood up as well. "You're letting this go too far," she said, her voice tight. "This is your home, Daniel. Your life. Don't let fear and nonsense control you." He didn't turn around, because for the first time, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like a warning he had almost missed. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet thought formed, one he couldn't shake anymore. What if the real danger wasn't the food, but the people sitting at the table? Daniel didn't say another word. He simply turned and began walking toward the kitchen. Each step felt louder than it should have, echoing through the quiet hallway. Behind him, he could hear Victoria's heels following, sharp, controlled, almost impatient. Lena stayed back at first, holding Ava close, but after a moment, she followed too, slower, hesitant. The house that once felt like a place of comfort now felt different. The lights were the same. The walls were the same. But something in the air had shifted. Daniel pushed open the kitchen door. Everything looked spotless. Counters clean. Utensils arranged perfectly. Not a single sign of disorder. If someone had walked in without knowing anything, they would have thought nothing was wrong. But Daniel didn't trust appearances anymore. He stepped further inside, his eyes scanning every corner. "Who was on duty tonight?" he asked without turning around. "2 chefs and an assistant," Victoria answered quickly. "They've already left." "Already?" Daniel asked. "Yes. Dinner was prepared hours ago." That didn't sit right. Ava made a small sound again, restless now. She shifted in Lena's arms and leaned forward slightly, her gaze moving across the kitchen like she was searching for something. Then she pointed, not at the counters, not at the stove, at a closed door near the back. The storage room. Daniel's eyes followed her finger. The door was shut tight. He hadn't paid attention to it before. It was just a storage space, nothing important. Or at least, that's what it was supposed to be. "Open that," he said quietly. Victoria stepped forward immediately. "Daniel!" "That's unnecessary. It's just supplies." "Open it," he repeated. This time, his voice carried something stronger. Not anger, authority. For a moment, Victoria didn't move. And that hesitation was enough. Daniel walked past her and reached for the handle himself. Lena held her breath. Ava went completely still. The door creaked slightly as it opened. At first glance, everything looked normal. Shelves lined with boxes, ingredients stacked neatly, nothing out of place. But Daniel didn't step back. He stepped in, slowly, carefully, his eyes adjusted, scanning deeper this time. And then something small caught his attention. A tray, placed slightly apart from the others. Not labeled, not stored like the rest. Just there. Daniel moved closer to it. Behind him, Victoria spoke again, her voice tighter now. Daniel, this is getting absurd. You're acting like there's some kind of conspiracy in your own home. He didn't respond. He reached out and lightly touched the edge of the tray, as if testing something he couldn't see. Ava suddenly whimpered softly. Lena instinctively held her closer. Sir, maybe we should. But Daniel raised his hand slightly, signaling her to wait. He looked back over his shoulder. Victoria was standing in the doorway now. Her expression had changed. The calm confidence she carried earlier was no longer as steady. It was still there, but thinner, controlled. Watched. Daniel straightened slowly. You said everything was normal, he said. It is, she replied quickly. Then why does this feel hidden? The question hung in the air. Victoria didn't answer right away. And in that silence, something shifted again, something deeper than suspicion now, something closer to truth. Ava let out another soft sound, almost like a warning, her small hand gripping Lena's shoulder tightly. Her eyes were fixed not on the tray anymore, but on Victoria. Daniel noticed, and this time he didn't ignore it. He turned fully to face her. The distance between them suddenly felt much larger than the space in the room. Victoria, he said quietly, is there something you want to tell me? Her lips parted slightly. For a second, it looked like she might speak. But then, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Fast, unexpected. All three of them turned at once. Someone else was in the house, and they were coming straight toward the kitchen. The footsteps grew louder, quick and uneven, breaking the fragile silence that had settled over the kitchen. Daniel stepped out of the storage room instinctively, placing himself between the door and Lena, his eyes fixed on the entrance. Victoria didn't move, but something in her posture shifted, like she was bracing for what was about to happen rather than being surprised by it. The kitchen door swung open. It was one of the junior staff members, a young man Daniel barely recognized. He looked pale, out of breath, like he had run through the entire house without stopping. Sir, I'm sorry, he said, struggling to catch his breath. I didn't know where else to go. Daniel frowned. What is it? The young man hesitated, glancing briefly at Victoria before lowering his voice. There's someone outside asking for you. He said it's urgent. He refused to leave. Victoria stepped forward immediately. This is not the time. Tell security to handle it. I tried, ma'am, he replied quickly. But he knew things. About the house. About tonight. That made the room go still again. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. What things? The young man swallowed. He said, You shouldn't trust what's being served in your own home. A sharp silence followed. Lena tightened her hold on Ava. Victoria let out a controlled breath, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes now, something closer to concern than irritation. This is ridiculous, she said. Anyone can say anything to cause panic. Daniel, this is exactly how people manipulate situations. But Daniel was no longer listening to her, because the words echoed too closely to what had already happened, to what Ava had warned, to what Lena had risked saying, to what he had just found in that storage room. Where is he? Daniel asked. At the front gate, sir. Daniel nodded once, then started walking. Daniel, Victoria called after him, her voice sharper now. You're seriously going to entertain a stranger over this? He didn't stop. Stay here, he said calmly, not turning back. All of you. But as he walked out, he could already hear the faint echo of heels behind him. Victoria wasn't staying. The hallway felt longer this time, heavier. Every step carried a weight he couldn't ignore anymore. Pieces were coming together, but not in a way that made sense yet. Just fragments, warnings, reactions that didn't match. By the time he reached the front entrance, the tension had followed him there. Security stood near the gate, clearly unsure what to do, and just beyond them stood a man, older, worn, not dressed like someone who belonged anywhere near this estate. But his posture was steady, his gaze sharp, locked directly onto Daniel, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Daniel stepped closer. "You asked for me?" he said. The man nodded slowly. "You're Daniel Hayes." "Yes." The man took a breath, like he had been holding on to something for too long. Then listened carefully. "You're being watched from inside your own house." Daniel's expression didn't change, but his focus sharpened. "Who are you?" he asked. "Someone who's seen this before." The man replied. "Different place. Same pattern. Control the environment. Control the people. And when the time is right," he paused, his eyes flickering briefly toward the house behind Daniel. "Everything changes in one night." Behind Daniel, Victoria's voice cut in. "That's enough." She stepped forward, her tone firm and controlled again. "You're trespassing. Leave now before this becomes a legal issue." But the man didn't look at her. He only looked at Daniel. "They replace more than just your staff," he said quietly. A chill moved through the air. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "What does that mean?" The man hesitated. For the first time, he looked uncertain, not scared but careful. "Check who you trust," he said. "Not what they say, but what they avoid." Then, without another word, he stepped back. Security moved in, unsure whether to stop him or let him go. But the man didn't resist. He simply turned and walked away into the darkness beyond the gate. The silence that followed felt louder than anything before. Daniel stood still for a moment. Then slowly he turned. Victoria was watching him closely. Too closely. And for the first time, Daniel realized something that made his chest tighten just slightly. This wasn't just about a suspicious meal anymore. It wasn't just about a warning from a child or a nervous maid. This was something bigger, something planned. And whatever was happening inside his house, it had already begun. Daniel stood there for a long second, the night air cool against his face, but his thoughts burning through everything he had just heard. When he finally turned back toward the house, something inside him had shifted. The hesitation was gone. Now he needed answers. He walked back inside without a word. Victoria followed closely, her calm mask fully back in place, but there was tension in every step she took. Lena was still in the kitchen, holding Ava, who had grown unusually quiet, her small face resting against her mother's shoulder. Daniel didn't waste time. "Call the rest of the staff back," he said firmly. "Right now." Victoria frowned. "Daniel, it's late. This is unnecessary." "It's not a request," he interrupted, his voice calm but final. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then, slowly, she reached for her phone. Within minutes, the house began to fill again. Staff members returned, confused and uneasy, whispering among themselves as they gathered in the dining area. The same place where everything had started. Daniel stood at the head of the table, his untouched plate still sitting there like silent evidence. "Something isn't right tonight," he said, his voice steady enough to quiet the room. "And I'm not going to ignore it." No one spoke, but the tension was visible now. People avoided eye contact. Some looked nervous. Others looked completely unaware. Daniel's eyes moved across each face carefully. Then he spoke again. "The kitchen staff," he said, stepped forward. Two men and one assistant slowly came forward. Their expressions were controlled, but not comfortable. Daniel nodded toward the plate. "Walk me through exactly how this was prepared." One of the chefs began explaining, his words smooth, practiced. Ingredients, timing, process. Everything sounded perfect. Too perfect. Daniel listened without interrupting, until the explanation ended. Then he asked one simple question. "Who handled this plate last?" There was a pause. A small one, but it was enough. The assistant glanced sideways, just for a second, before answering. I placed it on the table, sir." Daniel stepped closer. "Look at me when you say that." The young man hesitated, then slowly lifted his eyes. And that's when it broke. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said quickly, his voice shaking now. "I just followed instructions." The room stirred. Victoria stepped forward immediately. "This is getting out of control. You're scaring your own staff over nothing." But Daniel didn't look at her. "What instructions?" he asked quietly. The assistant's breathing grew uneven. "I was told to make sure that plate was served only to you." No one else. A heavy silence fell. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Who told you that? The young man's eyes flickered again. This time, not toward the chefs, toward Victoria. Everything stopped. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. Victoria didn't react immediately. Then she let out a soft, controlled laugh. This is absurd. You're going to believe this over me. Daniel finally turned to face her fully. Then say it clearly, he said. You had nothing to do with it. She held his gaze. Too long. Just a second too long. And that was enough. The calm in her expression slowly faded, replaced by something colder. Not panic, not fear, just acceptance. You were never supposed to question it, she said quietly. The room seemed to shrink around her words. Daniel didn't speak. Everything was planned, she continued, her voice steady now. The staff changes, the routines, the timing. You trust systems, Daniel. You trust order. That's what made this possible. A quiet shock moved through the room. Lena stepped back slightly, holding Ava tighter. Daniel's voice came low. Why? Victoria looked at him, and for the first time, there was no softness left in her eyes. Because everything you built was in the way, she said, and you were too careful to ever let it go. The meaning hung heavy. Not chaos, not anger, control. Daniel exhaled slowly, absorbing it all. The warnings, the patterns, the truth that had been sitting in front of him the entire time. And then Ava stirred. A soft sound, almost like a small sigh. Everyone's attention shifted to her. She looked up, her eyes no longer tense, just calm. Daniel followed her gaze instinctively, back to the plate, still untouched, still sitting there. He stepped toward it slowly, then stopped, because something didn't make sense. He turned back to Victoria. If everything was planned, he said quietly, why didn't you stop her? Victoria frowned slightly. What? Daniel nodded toward Ava. She warned me. Twice. The room fell silent again. Victoria looked at the child for a long second, and for the first time, there was confusion in her expression. I didn't even know she would be here tonight, she said. That answer landed differently. Not defensive, not calculated, just real. Daniel's eyes shifted to Lena. She froze under his gaze. Lena, he said slowly, how did you get assigned to tonight's shift? Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Then quietly, I wasn't, she said. Another silence, deeper this time. Daniel felt it settle in his chest. Because suddenly, the timeline didn't fit anymore. Victoria's plan, the staff changes, the controlled setup. It all made sense, except for one thing. Lena and Ava, they weren't supposed to be part of it. Ava looked up at him again, her small face calm, almost knowing. And in that moment, Daniel realized something that sent a quiet chill through him. The plan had been real. The danger had been real. Victoria had been behind it. But the one thing that stopped it, the one thing that exposed everything, was never part of the plan at all. The room stayed quiet long after the truth settled in. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if everything that had been carefully hidden had finally come into the light, and no one quite knew what to do next. Daniel looked at Victoria, not with anger, but with a calm that felt heavier than any reaction. It's over, he said quietly. She didn't argue. For the first time that night, she looked tired. The control, the confidence, the carefully built image, it all slipped just enough to reveal something real underneath. Not regret, not fully, but the understanding that she had lost. Security stepped in shortly after, following Daniel's silent signal. There was no chaos, no raised voices, just quiet steps, controlled movements, and a situation being handled without turning it into something public or destructive. The house that had almost become the center of something dangerous was now returning to stillness. The staff slowly began to disperse, whispering less now, their fear replaced with relief and confusion. The kitchen was cleared, the plate removed, and whatever had been set in motion, that night was finally stopped before it could go any further. But Daniel didn't leave. He stayed in the dining room, standing by the table where it had all started. Lena remained near the doorway, unsure if she should stay or go. Ava rested quietly in her arms. Her small fingers curled gently, no longer tense, no longer warning. After a moment, Daniel walked toward them. "Lena," he said softly. She straightened immediately. "Yes, sir." "You weren't assigned tonight," he said. "So why did you come?" She hesitated, looking down at Ava before answering. "I wasn't supposed to," she admitted. "But she wouldn't sleep. She kept crying. And then she just calmed down when we came here. I don't know why." Daniel nodded slowly. It wasn't the kind of answer that explained everything, but somehow it explained enough. He looked at Ava, who now looked back at him with none of the urgency from before. Just a quiet, innocent gaze. "Thank you," he said gently. Lena looked surprised. "Sir, she's just a child." "Maybe," Daniel replied. "But tonight, she saw something the rest of us didn't." The words stayed with him, because that was the truth. All the wealth, all the planning, all the control, none of it had been enough to protect him from what was happening right in front of him. It wasn't power that saved him. It was awareness. It was instinct. It was a small voice that refused to stay silent. The next morning, the house felt different. Not empty, but clearer. Changes were made quickly. The staff was reviewed. Systems were checked. But more importantly, Daniel changed the way he looked at things. He didn't just rely on structure anymore. He paid attention to the people within it. Lena was offered a permanent, secure position, not out of charity, but out of respect. She accepted quietly, still unsure how everything had unfolded the way it did. And Ava? She went back to being what she always was. Just a little girl. No warnings. No strange moments. Just laughter, soft words, and the simple presence of a child. Sometimes, Daniel would see her in the hallway, and for a brief second, he'd remember that night. The tension, the fear, the moment everything almost changed. And he'd pause, because he knew something most people never realize until it's too late. Danger doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it sits quietly at your table, dressed as trust. And sometimes the only thing that saves you is the one voice no one thinks to listen to.